Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today, we are tackling one of the most, let's be honest, skipped over parts of ancient history, the genealogy. Those long lists of names. But this is not just any old family tree. We're going to crack a secret code hidden right in plain sight to uncover the incredible origin story of one of history's most famous kings, David. I mean, it's a fair question, right? Most of us, when we hit a wall of names in an ancient book, our eyes just glaze over. It feels like a roadblock to the real story. But what if that list of names is the story? What if it's actually a carefully constructed message designed to convince you of something really important? And that is exactly what's going on here. The author we call the chronicler isn't just, listing facts for a census. Nope, they are making a powerful political statement. This family tree is a full-blown argument, a case being built piece by piece, all to prove one central idea. David is the rightful, chosen king, and his family line is the absolute heart of the nation's story. Okay, so let's get into it. The chronicler basically had three big things on his mind. First, and this is the big one, he had to establish David's kingdom as legit. Second, he needed to detail the importance of the priests, the Levites, and the temple. And third, he had to figure out how all the other tribes of Israel fit into this new world. And believe it or not, this family tree is the key to all three. Now, right off the bat, the chronicler gives us our first major clue. So you've got the 12 sons of Jacob, right? They founded the 12 tribes. Logically, if you're writing their history, you'd start with the firstborn son, Reuben. Makes sense. But the chronicler doesn't do that. He kicks things off with Judah, who is the fourth son. So what's up with that? Oh, this was so intentional. The chronicler flat out tells us that Reuben, the firstborn, lost his birthright. This moved Judah into the top spot as the leading tribe, and way more importantly, it made Judah the tribe that would produce the royal family. So by putting Judah first, the author is basically shouting from the very first page, pay attention, this whole story is about the kings. And this is where the story gets even more interesting. You see, the chronicler doesn't create some squeaky clean, perfect family tree for David. Not at all. Instead, he actually leans into the messy, unconventional parts of his family history, and he does it to make an even stronger point about destiny. The path from the patriarch Judah all the way down to David is laid out with surgical precision. It's not some sprawling, confusing tree, it's a direct highway. The chronicler is showing us that from the very beginning, this specific line, through Perez, Hezron, Ram, and Jesse, was the only one that mattered. This was the designated path to the throne. And check out some of the curveballs in this family tree. Judah's other sons, the ones he had with his Canaanite wife, yeah, they're dismissed pretty quickly. But the royal line continues through Perez, who was the son of Tamar, Judah's own daughter-in-law, who he had wronged. Then you've got Ruth, a foreigner, an outsider from Moab, who becomes David's great-grandmother. The chronicler isn't trying to hide these scandals, he's highlighting them to show that David's claim isn't about having a perfect pedigree, it's about a divine plan that works through some very unexpected people. Then we finally get to David himself, and the chronicler calls him the seventh son of his father Jesse. Now, in the ancient world, the number 7 was a huge deal. It meant completion, perfection, divine wholeness. So by calling David the seventh son, the author is making a powerful theological statement. David is the one. He is the complete, perfect, chosen king. Now, some of you might be thinking, hold on a second, I thought he was the 8th son. And you're right, other ancient texts do say that. But this probably isn't a mistake or a contradiction. It's much more likely a literary tool, a kind of epic poetry thing that was common back then, where the numbers 7 and 8 were used almost interchangeably. For the chronicler, the symbolism of the perfect number 7 was way more important than the literal head count. But the chronicler isn't done yet, not even close. This whole argument isn't just about proving David is the legitimate king. It's about setting him up as a king for all of Israel. And the genealogy is the proof, showing how David's family roots actually spread across the entire nation, creating this huge network of kinship. Okay, check this out. The chronicler carefully slips in these details, showing David's family is connected way beyond just his little hometown. Through his ancestor Hezron, he's got family all the way on the east side of the Jordan River. Another major family line came from an Egyptian servant who married in. He even had family ties to the super important southern city of Hebron. This is a family tree with branches reaching everywhere. And this makes everything click into place. Later on in the story, when David is trying to unite all the tribes, he says this to them. And because of how the chronicler has so brilliantly built this family tree, we get that this isn't just some nice political speech. David could literally point to his ancestry and show his shared bloodlines with people from all over the land. He was, in a very real way, their brother. So after meticulously laying out the case for David as this perfect, unifying king, the chronicler suddenly hits the fast-forward button. The genealogy just narrows its focus like a laser beam, and it races through 350 years of history, mentioning only one thing: the direct royal line coming down from David. We get a detailed list of David's sons, but then it immediately cuts down to just one, Solomon, his chosen heir. And from there, it is a straight shot, king after king after king, right down to Josiah. All the other family branches just get pruned away. The message from the chronicler couldn't be clearer. The history of the whole nation is the history of David's royal family, period. But the story doesn't end in glory. After the death of the good King Josiah, the whole kingdom of Judah just spirals into total chaos. The final names in this family tree reflect that confusion, showing a monarchy in its final death throes, being torn apart by squabbling sons and meddling foreign empires.
And what a mess it was. Okay, try to follow this. The people of Judah choose one of Josiah's sons, Jehoahaz, but then Egypt marches in, yanks him off the throne, and installs his brother, Eliakim. And they even change his name to Jehoiakim. Then, after he dies, his son gets hauled off to exile by Babylon, who then puts another one of Josiah's sons, Mattaniah, on the throne and changes his name to Zedekiah. It's this dizzying game of musical thrones, and the chronicler uses the genealogy to show us the pure chaos that led to the kingdom's final collapse.
So, you see, in the end, the chronicler's genealogy was never just a boring list of names. It was a masterfully crafted argument for a king, a story of national unity, of divine destiny, and ultimately of tragedy. And it leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. When we tell our own histories, of our families, or our communities, or our nations, what are we choosing to put in, and what are we choosing to leave out? Because history is never just what happened. It's the story we choose to tell about it.